Hi everyone, welcome to the Pure Soul Members Spiritual Focus topic for the month of October. This month's spiritual focus topic is death and dying. I have some notes here that I want to make sure that I reference, so if I tend to look away from the camera, you know what actually I'm doing is just reviewing to make sure that I cover all the points I wanted to. I want to talk about death and dying this month because I feel like something has kind of come to a completion in my understanding, and I wanted to be able to share that with you. So I'm going to start with the last piece of the death and dying topic because that's actually the first thing that I learned. When I was a little girl, I had a hamster named Pinky, and she passed away, and of course it devastated me. My grandmother and my grandfather told me that we could have a funeral for her, and so we began the preparations to have a funeral for my hamster. During that process, during that preparation, my grandmother had asked me if I wanted to gather some of the things that Pinky really liked while she was here in an earth body and send them with her to heaven. And so we did. We gathered some hay, we got some cotton balls, we got the little treats I used to give her, and we put them all in her little shoebox that we buried her in. So one of the first concepts that I learned about is having a great send-off for the people that we love. And if you go back and kind of look in your own past for the people that you love that have passed away, isn't it something that we all try to do is give them a good send-off? Maybe you write them a letter and put it in their casket with them, or maybe you send them away with pictures of the grandkids or family members. And so it's a pretty traditional concept that when people transition to live in heaven, the people here on earth really try to give them a good send-off and a good celebration of life. So concept number one really deals with the send-off, the goodbye to the earth realm, and the sharing of things that they loved to send them off to heaven so that they can enjoy and celebrate those things when they get there. When we do that, what we're really doing is sharing our love with them and letting them know how much we care about them and how much we know about them, that important things to them are sent with them to heaven. And in all reality, we're trying to send the love that we feel for them by giving them all the things that they like. So concept number one of death and dying, which is actually our last process, is to have a great send-off, to have a great celebration of life, and to recognize the things that they enjoyed about their earth life so that they can carry those feelings and emotions and things to heaven with them. The second concept for death and dying revolves around grief and guilt. And grief and guilt tends to be one of the things that really stick with people when their loved ones pass away. When I was about 9 years old, my cousin Benjamin died, and he was diagnosed with leukemia when we were really little kids, but we were around the same age. I think he was only like a year older than me. And when he passed away, I woke up in the morning and went into the living room, and my dad was just devastated, and he was crying and telling us that Ben had passed away. And I kept hearing a common theme from my dad. And his common theme that he was talking about in regards to Ben passing away was that he wished he would have went the previous week to visit Ben, and he wished that he would have took us kids on Saturday to visit Ben before he passed away. So concept number two of the death and dying experience is to not leave things left unsaid, to clear up anything that might be troubling us, or to express the love that we have, and to listen truly to our inner guidance, that if we're prompted to reach out to somebody, whether they're dying or not, that we want to do that, and we want to listen to that inner guidance so that we can express the way that we feel about people. Because if in fact they do pass away, we don't want to sit with, I wish I would have, I could have, or I should have. So keep in mind that when you're connected to people that you care about, live your relationship with them in a manner that isn't going to create a sense of guilt after they pass away. that you'll have no regrets and that you express that love to them. So concept number 2 about death and dying is to say the things that need to be said, to share the things that need to be shared, and to express the love that you feel with them and for them, so that if they move to heaven, you don't have to say, I wish I would have, I could have, or I should have. So let's avoid that and express love to the people in our lives so that we can always carry them in our heart in a way that doesn't involve a substantial amount of grief and guilt, because guilt triggers off that grief, and we want to try to avoid that. Grief is hard enough without guilt. So that would be concept number 2. Concept number 3 of death and dying I learned from my grandfather. My grandfather passed away actually on my grandmother's birthday, and that devastated the entire family. And when I asked my grandmother about that, I said, why would Papa die on your birthday? And she said, sometimes people pass away close to a family celebration or close to somebody's birthday or close to somebody's anniversary. And the reason that that happens is because your grandfather, this is what my grandma told me, because your grandfather loves me so much, loved her so much, that when he passed away, he wanted to make sure that all the love that was directed toward him would ultimately land on my grandmother. Because as the date of my grandfather's death approaches, we know that that date is June 3rd of my grandfather passing, but we know that my grandmother's birthday is also on June 3rd. So in my family, we take the fact that somebody passes on or near an important day in your life as saying you're probably their favorite person in the world, because they want to make sure that people that love them also direct that love to you, because they cannot think of the loved one without thinking of you as well. So when I go back into my life and I see the different people that I have cared about that have passed away, my mom died on the day of her best friend's birthday. My grandmother died on Jesus's birthday because that was truly her favorite person in the world. My grandfather died on my grandmother's birthday. A friend of mine passed away very close to her wedding anniversary. And these types of passings allow us to recognize that we are very close to that person, and that person cares about us so much that they chose to transition to heaven on a date that was important to us, so that we can always think of them on our special day, and so that others that think of them ultimately think of us, and that love is kind of redirected into our hearts. So concept number 3 about death and dying is to honor the people that we love and recognize how much they loved us. And don't take offense if they pass near an important or special time or date in your life, because they do that because they love you. So that's a key concept for me, and has always been a key concept for me in my life. The next concept that I want to talk about is the energy balancing that happens when someone is in their transition. There is a chakra balance that occurs when someone is heading toward heaven. And I learned that with my mom when she passed away. I was 21 when my mom passed away. And when I would go visit her in the hospital, there was a period of about 2 or 3 weeks that my mom was in the hospital prior to her passing. And when I went to see her early in those 3 weeks, I walked in and I saw my grandparents, my mother's parents, who had passed away when she was 10 and 12 years old. I saw my grandparents at the foot of my mom's bed, and they were like rubbing her feet and rubbing her legs and telling her how much that they loved her, even though my mom wasn't consciously aware at that time that her parents were at the foot of her bed. And I didn't pay much attention to it that day. I just noticed that they were rubbing her feet and rubbing her legs, and they were expressing how much they loved her. About a couple days later, I went back to the hospital to visit my mom, and I noticed that her parents were then around the area of her upper legs, you know, the thighs, the knees, and in that region of her body. And again, they were laying hands on her, and light was coming from their hands into her body, and they were just expressing the love that they felt for her and how important she was to them, and that she was going to be okay, and that God was going to take care of her. They told her how proud they were of her and the woman that she had become. And they were telling her in this vision that I saw them next to her legs, how her children would be okay and everybody would be okay, and that she could take care of them when she went to heaven. A couple days later, when I went back to visit my mom, I saw my grandparents, her parents, next to her stomach, and they were just kind of, you know, holding her hands right there by her stomach, and my grandmother in heaven had her hands kind of like rubbing my mom's tummy a little bit and telling her how beautiful she was and what a great fighter she was during this period of her struggle with cancer. A couple days later, I recognized that my grandparents were near my mom's heart. They had traveled up from the root of the bed, or the foot of the bed, all the way up, and now were stationary at her heart energy. And in that area, my grandmother had put her hand on my mom's heart and expressed all the love that God has for my mom, and how happy he was going to be to come and see her and to bring her to heaven with him. And so I noticed that there was a calming of emotions with my mom when my grandparents were standing in that location. A few days later, my grandparents were standing right about here near my mom, near my mom's ears, near her throat area. And on that day, I noticed that my mom was real talkative with us. On that day, she had a lot to say to us, and memories and old memories and things that she shared about our childhood. And she expressed those things to us. So she was expressing and vocalizing some things. A couple days later, I noticed that my grandparents were right about here, you know, right about at this level. And they were very quiet next to my mom this day. And on this day, my mom was telling me different things about what she thought heaven would be like. And she had had a couple experiences over those last couple days that she saw her mom and she felt her parents' presence around her. And then she started to tell me stories about when she was a little girl and different things, different memories about her parents. And so I recognized that she shared a lot of childhood information with me and with my sisters when we were visiting her that day in the hospital. A little while later, a few days actually, maybe it was even a week, for a while my grandparents had stayed around this area of her bed. A few days later, I was in the chapel and I was praying for my mom at the hospital, and went into the chapel at the hospital. And when I was in there, I perceived my grandfather, who is in heaven, and that wasn't my mom's mom, that's my dad's mom. And he came into the chapel and sat next to me, and he promised me that my mom would be okay. And I took that to mean that my mom would live an earthly experience and that she would not have cancer anymore. And I know that that was a naive thing to think, but you know, my grandfather came in and told me that she was going to be okay. Later that evening, when I walked into my mom's hospital room, I noticed that her parents were now standing at the top of her head. They were standing at the head of the bed. They were behind her, and their hands were rested on her shoulders and on her head. That is the day that my mom passed away. For a little while, I was pretty upset with my grandfather because I thought that he had told me something that wasn't true, that my mom wasn't okay. And when he visited me from heaven again, I was visibly upset with him, and I said, "How could you lie to me? You told me my mom was going to be okay." And shortly after that, I saw my mom's presence arrive standing next to my grandfather. And she looked at me and she said, "But I am okay, honey." And that helped me to realize that there is there is a balancing that happens. There is an acceptance that happens. My mom seemed so peaceful and so happy and so healthy when she connected with me, and I couldn't deny that my mom looked great and felt great and looked happy and even looked several years younger than she had on the day that she passed. So she tended to select a very nice eternal age, and that is something that I recognized as well. What I understood later is that as my grandparents moved from the foot of the bed to the head of the bed, and they stayed a little while at each location, I later understood that the locations that they were standing in was our chakra system and was my mom's spiritual energy. And I believe that what my grandparents were doing were bringing a balance to her body-soul relationship, first through the root, identifying and nurturing and loving and telling her how strong she was and how good she had done and how good she was doing in her battle with cancer, and what a beautiful family she had and how proud they were of her children and of her as a mom, because they didn't get to see her grow up in a physical sense because they had already transitioned to heaven. I noticed that when they got to the sacral energy around the waist and the upper legs is where they started to talk to her about us kids. And when they got to her solar plexus area, they told her about the body-soul relationship and how wonderful she was and what a good life she had led, and they validated her solar plexus energy. When they stood near her heart chakra, they really brought the balance of the body and the soul together, and they unioned some childhood memories with some adult memories, and it appeared that during that time that they were around her heart that my mom started to gather memories and information that she wanted to make sure she retained in her consciousness when she went to heaven. On the day that they were near her throat energy, my mom chatted with us, talked to us, told us a lot of memories about when she was a little girl, and I recognized that they must have brought some kind of balance to her energy of expression in the throat chakra, that she was able to verbalize all of those things with us and able to tell us also how much she loved us and what she wanted for us, for our futures. And the process continued. They moved to her third eye and her crown. Around that time that they were at her third eye area is where my mom started to express some of her own childhood memories about her parents, and she felt their presence around her. And so she started to kind of wake up in that third eye capacity in her chakra system and have some visualizations of her parents. And so that was actually very beautiful as well. So when they got to her crown chakra is when they took my mom's spirit, and my mom joined hands with my grandfather and then transcended and left her physical body. But that wasn't until the chakra balance had been completed and all the information that her parents wanted her to understand and come to peace with occurred during those several days that my grandparents were moving from the foot of the bed to the head of the bed. The next concept that I recognized was from my grandmother's passing. And my grandmother passed shortly after my mom passed, actually, and it was Christmas Eve when my when my grandmother passed. And what really stunned me the most is it was the middle of December. We live in Illinois, and it was snowing and it was cold outside, and we got word that my grandmother had passed in the nursing home. And obviously everybody was really upset. But I had gone into the kitchen and I started to do the dishes. Like, my mind just kind of went to blank when I found out that my grandmother passed away. So I just kept trying to do things. So I went into the kitchen and I started to do the dishes. And when I looked out the kitchen window, there were 2 white butterflies out there. And I'm thinking, this is impossible. It's the middle of December. How can these butterflies even exist? How can they even be present in the middle of winter? And then I heard this laughter. And the laughter I heard, I know my grandma's laugh, and that was my grandmother, which tipped me off that my grandmother was giving me a sign from heaven that she had made it to heaven okay. And some of the things that I really like to express is that when people go to heaven, they're not gone. They just don't have a physical body. And our goal is to find a new way to communicate with them and a new way to share experiences with them. And so I feel like it's so important to make sure that we look for that confirmation that they have arrived in heaven okay, that they are there. And you can take those first initial signs that you get to solidify for you that they have continued. And that's a really good concept to recognize, is that there are afterlife, life after life signs that your friends and relatives will give you when they get to heaven, just so you know that they made it there okay. And then you can use those signs in your future to recognize when they are visiting or when they are reaching out to you. The next concept of death and dying that I recognized was from a patient of my sister is an oncology nurse, and she had a patient that had passed away, and she had said to him, let me know how it is once you get there. And when I had a session with my sister and I reached out to her patient, I had asked him, what's it like? What was your transition like? And one of the things he showed me through vision is that at the moment that he transitioned out of his body, all pain, all discrepancy, all sadness, all turmoil, all the arguments, all the negative thoughts, all of the egoic conditionings that happen in our experience fell off of him like broken glass shattering. All the pain and all the negativity that can happen to our lives, that all fell away. And what he was left with was only the love that he had experienced in his life. And he was pleased with the amount of love that he had received. And he was also pleased with the amount of love that he had given to the people in his life. So I have also recognized that when we pass away, we have a shedding of the human experience, a shedding of that pain. And that was one of the most wonderful things to experience through her patient, was to share with us how it just falls away. And that we can be assured that when our friends and family transition into heaven, that they are healthy and happy and young and vibrant, and that they're not compromised or limited by a body that no longer functions for them. And it kind of brought into a concept for me that our physical body is like a vehicle. Our soul lives in it for the time that we are here on earth. And like any vehicle, our bodies can break down, and then they don't work to drive around in anymore. And that's the same type of concept with our own physical bodies. And so I recognize that we kind of treat our bodies like we treat our vehicles. We get in them in the morning because we need them to move around the earth. And at the end of the day, we park them in the garage, we turn them off, and we don't think about them until the next day when we need them again. So I recognized through this experience that it is really, really important to recognize that we are a spirit living in a human body. Our soul is borrowing this body from the earth so that we can have a physical representation to the soul that we are, and to do the things that we wanted to do when we are here on earth. The next concept of death and dying that I recognized is that people, when we pass away, the Bible says that we must become like little children in order to enter into the kingdom of God. And this is actually true. I had a client that I was having a session with, and her father had passed away. And she asked me, can you ask my dad what his transition was like? And so I asked the dad, what was your transition like? And he showed me a vision of him in the hospital, being very ill. At the moment of his transition, he stood up from his body and he walked toward, in the vision it was a street, like he had to cross the street. And I watched him start to cross the street. I watched him put his foot into the street, and he was an old man in the vision. At the moment that he put his foot into the street, however, he turned about the age of 7 or 8 years old. And he walked into the middle of the street as a 7 or 8-year-old little boy, and there was a lady there in the middle of the street who I understood was his mom. And the mom did not have an interaction with her son, my client's father, who looked like a little boy. Now she indicated to him that he should continue to cross the street. And so he did continue to cross the street, and when he crossed the street, he saw who I understood in the vision was his grandmother. And he literally jumped into his grandma's arms, and his grandma wrapped her arms around him. And while she was holding him as a small child, he grew up right before my eyes into the old man that he was, who had transitioned. And so I asked my client why her father, around the age of 6 to 7 years old, 7 to 8 years old, why he would begin to enter into the realm of heaven, turn into a child, but then bypass his mother and walk toward his grandmother, where he was received and welcomed, and where he grew back up into his original age. And my client had mentioned to me that when he was a little boy, about 6 years old or so, his mother had left and abandoned him, and he was then ultimately raised by his grandmother. So his most innocent point of love and his most deepest recognition of love is when he thought that his mom left and he didn't have anybody, and he actually had his grandmother. And from that is the moment that he was brought to, when he went into the realm of heaven and he was received by his grandmother. So in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven, we must become very much like children, and we do that by joining our most innocent point of love and the age we were at that time. So that's a beautiful concept as well. My next understanding of passing was from my friend Jimmy, who I worked with for many years at IBM, and he passed away. But about 20 years before his passing, I was sharing with him that I was a spiritual person and that I spoke with people in heaven. And he didn't buy into any of that. He was like, "Oh, Nikki, you're crazy. I don't believe in any of that." And I was telling him, "No, Jimmy, it's really true." So Jimmy and I made a plan. He said, "Well, I need to know if it's true. So if you die before me, you got to give me a sign. And if I die before you, I will give you a sign." So what we did is we settled on 2 words. I chose a word that I would share with him after my passing, and he chose a word that he would share with me after his passing. And 20 years passed since we had made that plan. And then Jimmy was diagnosed with cancer, and Jimmy passed away. And he was in a nursing home when he passed, and I was on my way to Costco. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning or 12 o'clock. And I was driving, and the car in front of me said the word spice on it. And spice is actually the word that Jimmy had chosen, that if he was passing or going to pass, or he had passed before me, that he would visit me and give me a sign, and that the sign would be connected to the word spice. And he did. And when I went into Costco, there was a sign across a display that they had, you know, those big spices that they have that are totally filled, like the pepper, or the real big pepper, or garlic salt or something, and they're in those jumbo spice containers, those jumbo plastic bottles. Well, when I walked into Costco that same day, I saw a sign that said spices, and then it gave the sale price, and I knew then that Jimmy had passed away, and that was actually what happened. And so I have found that if we really want to ensure that somebody made it to heaven okay, or they want to alert us to the fact that they are in the process of making that transition, or have already made that transition, that we can come up with a key word or a little sign to let us know that that transition is happening, or that that transition has actually occurred. So making a plan is one of the concepts of death and dying that I find really important. And I have a friend that passed recently, and one of the things that I asked her before she passed is, "Hey, when you're there, how am I supposed to know that you're trying to get my attention? Can you tell me? And she gave me a few things that she will try to do for me when she is in heaven, so I know that her presence is around me. And that is just amazing. So make a plan with your loved ones. The next thing I learned about the concept of death and dying is that there is something called a body sharing. And my friend Kelly taught me that. Kelly is my friend's husband who passed away of cancer. And one of the things that he had shared with me is prior to his passing, when he was in the hospital, his soul made a connection to me and said, please have, Linda go home and take a shower and everything, and I'm going to go with her. And I thought, because he was in my kitchen, that he had passed away. So I contacted my friend and I'm like, hey, Kelly is in my kitchen, so did he pass away? And she said, no, I'm at the hospital with him. He's breathing, he's fine. And I said, well, there's this thing from him that is telling me that he wants you to go home and take a shower, and he's going to go with you. But if he's still alive, how is he in my kitchen? And so I asked Kelly, who was in my kitchen, I said, well, how are you in my kitchen if you're in the hospital? And he said, oh, well, I'm not in my body. My dad is in my body. So Linda can go home and take a shower and have something to eat and get a little bit of rest. So I told that to Linda. I said, I'm talking to Kelly. He said that his dad is taking care of his body, so you can go home and take a shower. Well, needless to say, she was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I can't leave him. Shortly after that, her mother-in-law, Kelly's mom, came to the hospital, and she was taking care of Kelly with Linda right there in the room, when all of a sudden Kelly started to ask his mom for different things that he wanted and different massages that he wanted. And at the moment that he was asking for all these things, Linda's mother-in-law turned around to her and said, oh my gosh, he's acting just like his father. When his father had cancer, this is exactly how his father was. And she told Kelly, you remind me of your father. And what that helped both Linda and I to understand is that the message that Kelly had given us is that his father was watching his body, helping him go through this process of death and dying, during that time that Linda could have a little break and go home. So we are not alone in our transition of death. We do not experience the pain that others witness us to experience during that death and dying process, because the people that love us, our guides, our relatives, and our loved ones in heaven, they'll kind of tap out with us, right? They'll tap in, you get to tap out, you get to visit the people in spirit that you love, you get to give the messages that you need to give to the people that you love without being so stuck to the physical body, which is dying and in pain. And so our friends and relatives in heaven will do a body share with us, where their soul will move a little bit into our experience so that we are not as tortured in that pain, and that they help us carry that cross and carry that to the finish line and right into heaven. So keep in mind that when your family members are struggling with significant amount of pain or medication, that their family from heaven is there, and that they are giving them a break and letting them take a breather. And that is a beautiful thing to recognize and to understand. The next concept that I learned about death and dying was from a friend of mine whose daughter passed away. And I had met with her daughter several times, and what a lovely young girl. I just adored her. I just thought she was one of the most beautiful people I ever met. But she, during her transition, about 3 days before she passed, her soul had come to me, and her soul was showing me a vision of her kind of laying over the top of her body. And she looked at me, and her soul, which was separate from her body, above her body, transcended a little bit above her body. And she said to me, hey, Nikki, I'm out. And I had told my family about that. I said, she came to me. She's still alive, but she came to me and she told me that she was out, that she was going to be leaving her physical body. 3 days later, she passed away. I recognized, excuse me, I recognized at that time that there's about a 3-day process to when someone transcends or separates from their body, there's about a 3-day process that it takes for them once they acknowledge that distinction and acknowledge that they are leaving their physical body. When I looked at other people in my life also that had passed away, I call that the Trinity experience. It means that one of those days before passing is a God day, and we connect with the people that we love, and we share how much we adore them and how much we love them and what we want for them. And I call that like the God day. The next day is a very Jesus day. It's a very earth-connected day. It's where we think they're getting better. They look like they're getting better. And they're enjoying things on earth, like my mom wanted a cheeseburger the day before she died. And, people really start to embrace the things in humanity. So we tend, as their family, to get like a false illusion because we think that they are getting better, but they are just actually enjoying their Jesus day. So they have a God day and they have a Jesus day. We also get a Holy Spirit day, and that's usually the 3rd day into the 4th day, which is where we would pass away. And that's when the Holy Spirit comes and takes our soul and reunites us with our heavenly family. And so there is about a 3-day turnaround as one of the concepts of death when we separate from our body. The next concept of passing that I recognized was from my dad. When my dad passed away, this was a very difficult relationship for me because my dad and I didn't get along, and there was judgment that went back and forth from my end to my father and from my father's end to me. And one of the things I realized in his passing is that forgiveness is a crucial point of healing after somebody passes. And it's also a crucial point for people to transition in a positive, healthy, and holy way. And so for the relationships that you participate in that feel like negative or difficult relationships, try to step away from the idea of judgment and judging who they are. Stop judging what did they do to you, and instead forgive them in a sense that you recognize that without their presence in your life, what type of person would you be? My dad's relationship with me was very, very difficult. He was very abusive toward me. He didn't like the things that I do in my faith because he was a deacon in the church, so there was always some contention with the teachings of theology and what I do as far as my spiritual work. But when my dad passed, one of the things that I recognized is that without my father, I wouldn't be who I am. And without those negative experiences, I wouldn't be who I am. So instead of being angry with my father, I was able to thank my father because I know that the things I needed to learn here on this earth, he taught me about. I wish he would have taught me differently, but he followed his mission for God and prepared me for the work I do by challenging that as I was growing up. So it's really important that you step away from the idea of judgment and move into the idea of forgiveness. And instead of looking at your loved ones that you have had a contentional relationship with or a difficult relationship with, instead of saying, what did they do to you? Ask yourself, what did they do for you? Because in what they did to you, something was being done for you. Focus on that because that's going to be the best way to heal those negative relationships when people pass away, so we don't carry that negativity with us when they go. And that they don't carry that negativity with them when they go. That the connection that we share with people is based in gratitude for whether we deem an experience to be positive or we deem an experience to be negative. It is important to find that sense of balance and move toward forgiveness and balance. So the next thing I learned about was from my Auntie Kay, who passed away. And she taught me about how the last breath on earth is actually the first breath in heaven. And when I was with her, when she was passing away, me and her children and my children were present with my Auntie Kay when she was passing away. And I saw her laying in the bed at 84 years old, and I saw her take her last breath. When I saw her take her last breath in her physical body, I saw her soul take a first breath. So the last breath was the first breath. And my Auntie Kay, in her spirit, stood up out of her physical body. She looked about 35 years younger. She looked like she was like, I don't know, 40. She had on a black jumpsuit and a black choker necklace, and she had a glass of champagne in her hand, and she turned around and looked at me as she was walking past me. She looked at me and she says, well, that wasn't so bad, honey. And she said, who would have known? And I understood that what she meant, that the torture that we feel when our friends and family take their last breath, if we could understand that that is actually their first breath in heaven, it is such a beautiful experience to witness and to recognize. It was a little hard for me to come to terms with that, because there was a part of me that was in deep grief, because I looked at my aunt's body in her hospital bed at 84 years old, passed away, lifeless. But her soul stood up, looked right at me, said it wasn't that bad, let me know that that last breath I witnessed was actually her first breath. She looked like an eternal age of 40. She looked young and beautiful and healthy, and it was wonderful. So when we think of the last breath, let's think of the first breath and to their new experience of heaven and how glorious and beautiful that is. It changes the nature of the game. We can be grateful for their first breath of life, and that's what happens when they go to heaven. The next thing that I recognized was from my dear friend who recently passed away, and I had a session with her the Sunday before she passed away. And during that session, she had expressed to me that she was worried about her children and worried about what would happen with them when she passed away, and she really needed to know that they were going to be okay. Like I said, there's this 3-day transition that occurs. The following day, on Monday, my friend, who was in the process of dying, connected with me in spirit, and she said, it's time for me, and cleared that up for me. But she looked young too in her presentation when she connected with me in spirit. She didn't look like she looked during our session. She didn't look sick. She didn't look swollen. She looked beautiful. She looked young. She looked healthy. She looked happy. And she just said to me, it's time. And then 3 days later, she passed away. And one of the things that I'm so grateful to her for is that she allowed me to be a witness to her transition in those 3 days. She showed me that she visited with each one of her children, and that she soulfully infused them with her hopes and her wishes and her desires for their lives and their love. And she identified for them what spirit guide role that she would be with each of them. She spent 3 days tying up loose ends, I guess, visiting and connecting from a spiritual perspective all the people that she loves on this earth, and gathering the memories from each one of their hearts that will be used later in a form of spiritual communication. The memories that we share with someone become our language with them after they no longer have a physical body. It's our way to communicate with them. And she spent these days sharing that language or information with her loved ones. I also saw her go to people that have supported her during this journey and infuse soul energy with them as well. So there's always a period of goodbyes. There's always a period where the spirit that is connected to our loved ones shares in spirit while we are with them. And they visit us before they lose their physical body to share that type of union with us, so that they can always be connected to us. So I thank her so much for giving me a preview to those 3 days and what actually happens in those 3 days prior to passing and transition. The next thing I recognized is that the things that I've been talking about today are connected to people who are on a journey of transition. That means that something put them on that journey. Maybe they have come to an older age in their life, and that's why they're on that journey. Maybe they have a physical condition or medical illness that also puts them on that journey, headed toward heaven. And so it's easy for me over the course of years to give you these different concepts that are connected to death and dying, but there's always a question that remains. What happens when there is no journey of death and dying? What happens when it is actually a tragic experience? What occurs at that point? And one of the things that a friend of mine, her son passed away recently, and I asked him about that. I said, well, what is your transition like? What was that like for you then, if everybody else has this period of time and this chakra balance and these periods of goodbye and spiritual infusion of love and guide roles, and what happens then? What happened to you? Do you not get that process? And one of the things that he had answered me is that in the process of death, when it is a tragic type of experience, a car accident or a crash of some kind, or in the wrong place at the wrong time, and something happens and you pass away and there is no journey to get there, that we can thank these individuals that agree to leave Earth in a tragic manner, because they are the martyrs to our experience of life. They reset us. They help us to recognize the value of life, what's important in life. They help us actually to cover all of the points that I have covered today. They teach the people that are left here on Earth not to forget to say I love you, not to forget to apologize, not to carry anything negative with you, to share your love, not face any regrets. So we learn those things through a process of dying when somebody that we love passes, but we also are gifted those same types of understandings when someone passes tragically. It just tends to hit us all at once, and then it takes us a little bit of time to discern all of those lessons, where when our family members pass, but it takes a while on that journey due to an illness of some sort, that we actually get time to acclimate to that. And so although the end result of information is the same, when there is a tragic passing, it tends to catapult us into that shock experience where it takes us a few days or weeks or months to process that same understanding of death that we maybe would have been a little bit easier guided into if someone has a journey of passing. So gratitude all around for the energies and the souls and the lives of the people that have been so gracious and kind to share this spiritual information with me. I hope it serves a benefit for you, and I hope that we can discuss a little bit more of this on our Zoom call this month. I look forward to seeing you all there, and I hope this helps in your journey of transition for your friends and family that you care for. Thanks so much for joining me for October's spiritual topic for this month for our Pure Soul Premier members. Thanks again. I love you guys. Bye.